one thing you mentioned was all the questions that you teach your young people and your,
Yes.
Does one of your books have those questions? I got in a debate with one of my neighbors just today after being told to be bold, but it didn't go great.
Yeah.
And so, what are those questions that we can ask?
You know, that's a great question, and the answer to that question is it depends on what topic you're talking about and what questions they ask you. So let me back up and give a little training that we think is important for the young people and what we do. The pedagogy of American education changed in the 1920s. They made 5 major systemic changes in the philosophy of education. That's what we're under today. Even Christian schools often use the same systemic philosophy or pedagogical philosophy. What we did for the first 3 centuries was we taught people how to think. Starting in the 1920s, we taught them how to learn. The people who did that said, look, we've got factories, this is an industrial revolution. We need workers who will take orders and not think. We need them to do what we tell them to. And so that's where we switched education, and what we have today is a lot of learners. That means if you hear something, you receive that and take it as truth. You don't think about it, you don't challenge it, you don't question it. So what we do is we take people back to old books from 3, 4, 2, 1 century ago and show how we taught thinking skills. And once you learn how thinking skills work, and by the way, in Proverbs 22:6, it says, train up a child in the way he should go. When he's old, he won't depart from it. If you look in the King James Version, especially in the marginal commentary, it says the word train up means catechize a child. Catechize is a teaching method. If you use the method of catechism, and so we have in our old collection, we have catechisms of chemistry, catechisms of geology, catechisms of entomology, catechisms of music, catechisms of electricity. Everything we taught used to be catechism because you had to think about it because you're asking questions and answers. That's what a catechism is. And so you have to first train yourself how to start asking questions even of yourself. Why do I do that? Why did I say that? What could I have done different? You start asking questions all along and you start training yourself in thinking. So it's hard to know exactly what answer to give you on what, depending on what the topic is. I can give you some questions you can ask, but if they come back with them, what are you going to say? And so what I encourage you to do is start asking yourself questions like crazy. Every topic you can think of, ask yourself questions. So
testing. I don't know. We lost yours.
So
okay.
Train yourself in thinking. We have a guy at our office when we do this in summer for young people. Jonathan Ritchie at our office.
Use this one. There you go.
That one.
Yep.
Jonathan Ritchie at our office is really the one who does so much at our office with training young people how to think. And so I would recommend that you contact Jonathan at our office and ask him what questions would you use and what question. And there's 4 or 5 fundamental questions we give kids, no matter who your professor is. This is what you should be asking your professor. And then past that, it depends on what the topics are. So I'm sorry I can't give you a precise answer to that, but that's kind of the background on how to deal with it.
All right, sorry to cut you off here. Let's go over here now.
I had a question in regards to something you said this morning during the church service. You said when it comes to learning real history, not what we've been taught, and it requires hard work. How do you even begin that hard work? Do you have resources on your website for good books we can actually go to and we can teach our child the history lesson my husband and I never learned?
Yeah. I'm going to send you back to an old way of learning history. Old way of learning history is what we see in the Bible. When God taught, you look in the Bible, can you tell me what year David killed Goliath? Why? It's not there. God didn't put it in there. Is it not important? No, that wasn't the point of the story. See, what happens in the Bible, history you learn by stories. You get all the stories of what happens. We changed again in the 20s our pedagogy to where it's dates, names, and places. It's no longer people and events. You don't have the story. And so as you read in Revelation 12:11, it says we overcome the enemy, the evil one, by the word of our testimony, by telling our story. So story is what everything is based around. We used to learn American history by reading biographies. If you wanted to learn the American Revolution, you read the biography of George Washington, of ladies like Abigail Adams, of black guys like Wentworth Cheswell, of what you read biographies. That's how you learned what happened. So what I would recommend for history study is if you go to books.google.com, it's one of the Google services. They have millions and millions of old public domain books on there. Find somebody you want to read about and go back and get, here's my rule. If it's from before 1880, I'm about 95% trustful of what they have because we had enough integrity back then, truth mattered. When it gets to 1920, I'll only believe about 70% of what I read in that book. I've got to be careful. I've got to look into a lot of stuff. If it gets after 1950, I'm down to about 50%. And if it gets after 1980, I'm about 20%. Only about 20% am I likely to believe without really checking stuff out. So I would recommend the thing to do is go back to books.google.com, choose John Quincy Adams. Read a biography on him. He died in 1848. 2 great biographies came out in 1849, one by Josiah Quincy, one by Samuel Sewall. Great biographies. You can get them online. That will open up so much of what history is and does. Read biographies, and that's what I'd recommend.
Thank you very much.
Okay, let's go back over here for Chris.
Yeah, speaking of truth, we are called to be in the post-truth era. There was, I think in the early 2000s, maybe a woman that came out, authored the book. It goes way back, obviously, to Friedrich Nietzsche, who's sort of the author maybe, but it goes back to Satan even. But how do you relate this to, our Orwellian culture where the facts don't matter? I've already made up my mind. We've got an agenda. We're in the post-truth era. How do we battle that?
Yeah, one of the things we do to start our youth training sessions is in the first day, within 15 minutes, we can have every student believe that there is absolute truth. It's just asking the right questions, putting them in the right situations. We think we're going again?
Let's see. Are we good?
We trying it? Coming through? Can you hear it? Okay. Although we teach that there is no absolute truth, you can easily get people to believe it. So, no absolute truth, you mean if somebody walks into an elementary school and starts shooting up the place, that's okay? No, that's not okay. Well, what if he thinks it's okay? Well, he's wrong. Oh, so you do think there's right and wrongs. You can create situations and scenarios where people recognize and say, now, you've been told there's no absolute rights and wrongs, but let me show you how many places that's wrong. And so what we can do is walk them through scenario after scenario after scenario after scenario where they agree that that's totally wrong. And you can also do that with socialism, with other things as well. Once you get them to acknowledge that there are rights and wrongs, okay, now let's think about socialism. So that means if you work really, really hard and your neighbor doesn't work at all, you think that your neighbor should get exactly as much as you do. I don't think that. Well, that's what you support. No, it's not. Well, that's what socialism believes. So, by the way, I'll tell you the other thing. This is why one-on-one is so important. George Barna, after seeing the numbers I shared this morning, 75% of college students think socialism is the way to go, 69% of millennials, and 41% of all Americans. George said, okay. I love George, and we hire him to do polling for us because he doesn't let you get away with just saying an answer. He wants to know why you said the answer. And so what George did was he took the 41% who said that socialism is a good thing, the nation needs it, and he asked them 47 additional questions about it. He said, so do you think that the government should have greater ownership of private property, which is socialism? Do you think that the government should have more regulations on business, which is socialism? When it got done, only 2% of Americans supported socialism once they knew what it was. So he says, so what do you think socialism is? The top 2 answers on what socialism is being social with other people, like social media, or it means sharing. I'm not opposed to sharing. Am I a socialist? Apparently. See, what happens is you have to get people to where that they can acknowledge certain things are right and wrong, and then you start using definitions that are based on absolutes, and you can swing them. And so there has not been a year go by in this training where we don't have young people go back and convert their professors simply by asking the professors questions they've never thought about before. And so you can teach that skill, but again, truth, you have to start with the premise there is, and we can prove it to you. And so by putting kids in situations, we can do that. Then once you get there, you can present other information.
Okay.
Where you said if you don't have a younger generation and you do have an older generation that's a little bit more adamant in their ways, you can definitely start with them. My question is, for some of the more tougher nuts to crack, what are some suggestions that you could make to them, or some conversation starters to kind of really spark their thinking?
The first thing you have to do with that is you have to have a good trust relationship, because you can't have conflict if you can't have trust. And so, by the way, don't look for a millennial and take them out to Coke and tell them how stupid they are for believing in socialism.
That's the furthest thing from my mind.
That's, yeah. What you have to do is you have to build a relationship of trust, and you have to take somebody, be friends with them 6, 8, 10 times, trust relationship. I'm not attacking you, whatever. And then you can gently start asking questions. Why do you believe that? Well, what if it were this way? And so generally, once someone trusts you, you can have the give and take that you need. Iron sharpens iron is the way that Proverbs talks about it. And you can poke them and prod them and push them, but not until you have a good trust relationship. And so depending on what the issue is as to how you can push them and how far you can push them, one of the things we'll ask the young people is, we spend the afternoons having them do research on whatever. Take a signer of the Declaration you never heard of and go find out what's his family like, how many kids did he have, what did he do with slaves, what did he do with faith, whatever. And they have to come back and find it. So we can send them out and say, there's 5,800 years of recorded history. We want you to find one example in history where a nation went to socialism and they were able to preserve individual liberty and individual prosperity. Find us an example. There's none out there. Right. I couldn't find anything. Man, I looked for 3 hours. Exactly. So how do you think it's going to work out if we do that? I guess it's not going to work. Exactly. So depending on what the issue is, you got to have a trust relationship. Then you can start poking and prodding. But you have to see what the trust level is and what the issue is. When it gets into sexuality, LGBTQ, IA+, that kind of stuff, it's a little more sensitive because people internalize that a lot more. You just have to play it by the relationship itself. So sorry. That's
I appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
All right. I always hate doing Q&A because then you always got to be the bad guy and stop the speaker. And I just want to listen to you all day. All right, here we go. Let's go back over to Randy.
Quick question. There's so much misinformation floating around today. You mentioned this morning you looked on Google, couldn't find what you found on DuckDuckGo. Can you give us some vetted sources for trusted information?
I can give you some sources for information that I think are more reliable, but even with sources that I think are reliable, there's times I disagree with them and find things they have an error. Sources of news for me, we have a network of about 1,000 legislators. I have a lady at our network, she's our executive director. She will scour through hundreds of articles a day to find things to send to the legislators. And so she has a list of what we consider really good articles, but Foundations of Truth is a website, comes out with 2 articles a week. They're very sound, very good biblically. Epic Times, I put about 85% confidence in Epic Times, what I see there. Newsmax, about 80%, but that's much higher than most other medias out there. Because so much media today is driven by the interviews they have, and the interviewers are pathetic in a lot of cases. So the news might be good, but the interviews and experts are not. There are some news, we have a list. I wish I was better prepared for that. The list that Audrey has, our executive director, has good sources of news information, and I just don't remember all of them right now. But there are several that we do go to get reliable news, sound news.
All right, let's go back over to this side.
2 questions. Are there measures to stop the Dominion voting system, or how do we stop the next elections to be rigged again? The second question is, how do you see America in the context of the end times? Are we going to be part of the one world government or the Great Reset? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Let me take the eschatology issue. I love eschatology. I can't tell you how much eschatology is studied the end times in the Bible. And I studied that so much, I can take any position on any side and you won't know what my position is. I can be pre-trib, mid-trib, premillennial, postmillennial, amillennial, panmillennial. I can be anything out there. Here's what I know about end times, is I believe without question the scriptures of God are inspired, they're inerrant, and they're infallible. They're 100% right all the time. I accept that. Which means that when John and when Peter and when Paul all said that they were living in the last days, they were living in the last days. Now, how long did the last days last? Well, at least 2,000 years, because that's when they wrote it. It was back then. What I have found is that every generation since them, particularly in American history, every generation, I've talked about Columbus this morning. Remember Columbus? Jesus is going to be back in 155 years. Sam Adams said, I've talked to all the theologians, all the prophecies have been fulfilled. Jesus will be back by 800 is what they're all saying. I can take you to every generation who thought they were in the last days because the prophecy has been fulfilled so many times. Here's the point that I make about the last days. Jesus said, I don't even know when I'm coming back. Father will tell me, I have no clue when that's going to be. He said, now you can watch the signs at times and see, but I don't know when it's going to be. So when we look at parables, I think the mistake we make in looking at parables like the return, like a thief in the night, etc., we look at his role, at what he's doing. We should look at our role. Our role is not when he comes back. Our role is, are we ready when he comes back? Are we like the 10 virgins, the 5 that were ready, the 5 that weren't? So my view on end times is I'm always going to be prepared for it, but I don't care when it is or what it happens, because it's not going to change anything I do. I'm going to do the same thing regardless of whether I know he's coming back tonight or 5,000 years from now. It will not change what I do. My involvement will be the same. I'm going to press forward to change as many generations, as many lives as I can. And so for me, that is an issue I have dealt with eschatologically, biblically, and historically. And my landing place is, I don't know about that, but I do know what I'm supposed to do. And that's where I come down on it.
Two aspects of the post-election voting, and one being the lawsuits concerning potentially future ways of doing elections, but you also mentioned Cindy Powell concerning the validity of the voting results. Hearing all this, what is it we're to believe, and does it matter or not?
It's a complicated question. A lot of the answer to that is what's provable. Do I believe fraud happened? Yeah. Can it be proved? Not if you're a really good tech guy. I know the guys that are doing the forensic audits, and I've watched them break into any voting system in the country in 15 minutes or less and change the votes in it. Now, you can't always find a fingerprint of where they've been there. So the biggest issue is what can you prove, and that's the issue with fraud. What you can prove with law is a whole different thing. That's why I think they'll win more suits on that, and that's why I think it will have a huge impact 2 years from now. What you can prove with fraud, there's only one case that's still going out of those 81 cases right now that's dealing with the fraud issue. Now, Maricopa County 2 weeks ago said they're going to do a complete audit, a fraud audit on all their Dominion machines, and I know the guy who's going to be doing a lot of that forensic work, and I know 2 guys doing that, and they're really good at this, and if there's a fingerprint that can be found, they're going to find it. But the trick is that there's just so much sophistication out there in so many ways. I mean, if we were able to go in and change Venezuela's election, and they never knew it, and we're changing other elections, I mean, there's just a lot out there. So this is where I go back to what I can control, and what I can control, be careful how I say this. While we are focused on national elections, national change is not what's going to be it. We have to change where we are and where we live. And so looking at, take about 3 minutes to give an example.
Okay,
I'm going to take a little
it.
time here. Fort Worth, Texas is the first place in the United States that said we need to get rid of genders on bathrooms and on locker rooms. My place, Fort Worth, Texas. Are you kidding me? A red state? President Obama picked that up, said that's a great idea. He went to the Department of Education. They said if you get federal funding, you will have only one gender bathroom. This is 7 years ago. You'll only have one gender bathroom, one gender locker room. It went across the nation. There was a reaction to it. So I looked in Fort Worth. I said, this is crazy. We have 800,000 people in Fort Worth, Texas. That's not what we believe. I looked at the school board elections in Fort Worth, and the president of the school board who made that decision received 1,182 votes out of 800,000 possible votes. I looked in his district. There was a church in his district that had 3,000 adults. It was an evangelical Bible-believing church. That one church had 3,000 adults. That one church could have taken him out of political life in a heartbeat. And nobody's looking at that because they're all watching the national news and what's happening with the election. And so from that, as it started to spread out and the Department of Education said everybody's going to do this, there was a lady in northwest Arkansas, and it's a town of 40,000 people there. It's a well-known town. She said, no, that's not going to happen in my school district. And so she decided to run for the school board, and she did. And in a town of 40,000, she got elected to the school board with a total of 35 votes. 35 total people voted in that election. She won the election. Go to Riceville, Iowa. There's a pig farmer there said, not in my school you don't. He ran for the school board. And as it turned out, on election day, he got busy and he did not go vote for himself. And it's not that he lost by one vote. It's that nobody voted in the entire election. If he had voted for himself, he would have been on the school board. See, those are the races we don't pay attention to. Garcetti down in L.A. brags about the fact that he was elected with 2.9% of the vote. Are you kidding me? L.A. is bigger than 42 states. He's like the governor of 42 states, and he got elected with 2.9% of the vote. Are you kidding me? That's where I put a lot of the focus on. That's what I can fix. That's what I can do. And so that's really where we start with Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, uttermost parts of the earth. We teach a lot of classes on how to recruit candidates and how to elect candidates, but that's the place to start.
All right, let's go you really quick.
I'll try to go quickly. I had a couple questions, and you may have already answered a few of them, but I'll just ask anyways if you have any other thoughts on it. Earlier, you had mentioned about mentoring younger people. So as a young person myself, there are young people around me. And I want to be specific with this question. Let's say, for example, high schoolers, right? What are some ways, and I understand relationships is the number one thing that needs to be there to build that trust and communication. What are some ways in high schoolers that we can, because the fire is quenched, I want to say, let's say.
That we can what?
I want to say because maybe there's no fire, there's no flame in them, how can we, I don't know the right word, but start that, encourage that.
You need them to have confidence in what they believe, because they won't share what they don't have confidence in. And having confidence, I mean, there's some ways systemically to do that for high schoolers. There are a lot of laws in place right now that allow them to have all sorts of Bible opportunities at public school, even in San Jose, San Francisco, wherever. The courts have already ruled that. Supreme Court's done that. But it really takes kind of building support structures around them. There's what's called a release time program, which is designed to help young people understand the apologetics, so you can take them out for a certain time a week and do that. But it's about building their confidence and their ability to defend what they believe. And so if you can help them understand, and that's the apologetics. There are some, maybe you can take some kind of like some study courses with it. Wayne Grudem has a great book on apologetics, theologically and policy-wise. He's a great theologian. So maybe you can take and kind of do some, smaller meetings and get their feet under them where they get confidence down. And once they do, they're very aggressive in a lot of ways. But they have to have the confidence to be able to go out and challenge somebody or defend what they believe. And I don't have a good answer for how you do that. I mean, we do have 1,200 school districts across the nation right now that are teaching the Bible in public school. You can't keep it out. There's 200,000 kids doing that. And as hostile as they may be here, they can't stop it because the courts have ruled that can be done. So National Council on Bible Curriculum in Public Schools is a good place. There are 3 groups that I know of that do that, provide curriculum for kids in school. There's release time programs. There are equal access programs. There's a lot legally that can be done, but you guys are in a hostile climate. You know that. Right. So it's really what you're willing to do to kind of push the administration to allow certain things to happen, and what you can do to support those kids once it does happen.
Right. And sorry, 2 more things. Hopefully it'll be short and quick.
Okay, keep up really short.
Keep it short. Okay. Sorry. I work in a very secular workplace, and it's overwhelming, and I get kind of lost into, sharing the good news and the gospel, probably because of fear. Maybe, I'll get in trouble, and then there's this talk of a requirement to get a vaccine, and I almost feel forced to take it. And if I don't take it, then I might, have the danger of losing my job. So where do I start? I'm lost to defend. And I know we were on offense.
You mean like defending on the vaccine position?
I'm not. I don't want to take it.
No, but are you talking about defending on the vaccine position or on your faith position?
Both.
One of the best ways to defend in a hostile climate on faith position is storytelling. Go back to telling stories. People have a hard time contradicting stories and saying that didn't happen. Hey, there's this cool story about this guy or this lady or whatever. So telling stories is a good way to break down hostility to faith. On the other side, the vaccine side, there is conscience protection constitutionally, First Amendment. It generally, in a state like this, will take legal action to get that done. Whether it's for healthcare professionals or anything else, there are groups like Liberty Counsel. This is something they do specialize in, is people who don't want vaccines because of, and it's not just COVID. This has been going on a long time with vaccines and homeschoolers and education and everything else. So Liberty Counsel, Brad Dacus also does a lot on vaccines, and he's here at PJI, Pacific Justice Institute. you can get some legal positions and go in and say, hey, you may say I've got to, but here's the legal cases that say I don't. Right. And those guys may not be able to defend you because right now I know Matt Staver has lawsuits going in 40 cases, or 40 states simultaneously. It's unbelievable what he's doing. Right. So, but you can get the legal help, and they can get you the legal help, and then you can take it to your employer and say, you know what, I have a religious conscience objection to this vaccine, and therefore, here's the cases that say I don't have to do it.
Right, right. All right, I hate to cut you off there. Can you talk to him after? Okay, we'll have some time with you. Okay, MK, really quick.
So you mentioned you were in politics for 8 years, I think.
I was what?
You were in politics?
Yes, 9 years.
I was just curious because honestly, recently my friends have been talking about jobs, and I realized I think I'd want to get into political workforce. What are your tips?
Good for you. My number one tip is you need to sign up for what's called Patriot Academy. Patriot Academy we run, and it's for people like you that young, you feel like you want to be in politics, and we now have hundreds of our Patriot Academy kids from Congress all the way down through state attorney generals, through whatever. Right worldview, you learn how the process works, can train you in that. I would say Patriot Academy. And we have regional academies across the nation. We have one up in the Pacific Northwest and up in the Northeast and Southwest and Southeast. But the one that's the longest and the best and the most thorough and the most rigorous is the one we hold in the first week of August in Texas. We take over the state capitol in Texas and actually use the state capitol as a training grounds for all the stuff. So you're on the floor of the House and Senate arguing bills and doing all the stuff. So I would say Patriot Academy is the place to go.
All right. Let's close it off with you.
So I have a lot of friends and family that are leaving the state because of what's happening here. And I don't feel called to do that.
Good.
And what can we do here to help this state?
There's a whole lot of people who are not feeling called to leave California now. And to me, that's a great indication God's got some good stuff coming. He needs people on the ground to be able to do it. My knowledge of California, it's been a number of years since you've had a really effect, and if I'm wrong, please forgive me, it's not intentional, since you've had an effective group here to really help with politics and be effective. Just the pastors and churches I know in California, I am absolutely convinced that I could go into those pastors and churches and come up with enough assembly members to take a third of the assembly pretty easy, and that's without much hard work. It's just that the church has not been organized in how to engage in that process and got focused on that process or even had the training of that process. And so I think we're told in Proverbs that you prepare your fields and then you build your house. And so what happens is people are wanting to build a political house that's different than what's here, but they haven't prepared the fields yet. And there's a lot of work that goes into candidate recruitment, candidate education, candidate training, mobilization, how to create constituencies in a community that have a voice and influence without being bombastic. And there's just a lot of stuff that can be done, and I think that's coming to California. I think that'll happen. And God's doing a lot of folks like you saying, don't leave the state. And that to me is just a subjective indication that God's got something good coming, but it's going to take a lot of work, as you know. I mean, people aren't going to give up the power they've got easily, but you guys really need some adult supervision and somebody taking on the political realm and starting to focus on that, because you've got enough conservative Bible-believing Christians and churches in California to turn this around. Just got to get them involved and engaged.
Thank you.
All right. Hey, thank you so much.
Thanks, man.
All right. Thank you guys for coming. Let's